Are there any questions? I mean, because I could ask questions from the floor just as well as you can. Are there some questions? You'd like to ask a question to the panel?
Hey, interesting topics, and a great presentation. Thank you for that. I have a question for Eric, because he was kind of explaining how he kind of converted DuPont to a more cyber-secure company, right?
Yes.
So, do you have kind of a dashboard to senior leadership how far you are?
Yes, I do.
KPIs, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, we do have KPIs that we measure, and those were kind of homegrown metrics that we use to try to display our progress to, the conformance status for an individual site towards those metrics. I can't share them, obviously, but I apologize for that. But we do have something that we developed, just an Excel spreadsheet, basically, with tracking. I can provide the format, but I can't provide many of the details. Okay, so well, when you look at the standard architecture and try to figure out, in the framework, what is important for cybersecurity, things like, do you have a process control segmentation, via firewall? Are you running antivirus? Are you doing patching? Have you had your, system visited by our, system hardening experts? Are you running procedures? Are you doing backup and restore? Are you doing good user account management policies, and so forth? And then we just applied weighting factors to those and came up with a number, 0 to 100% for each one of those. Sure.
And they're not just, let me ask a question, a follow-up to that, if you don't mind. Because one thing I see a lot is people will measure their risk or their position or condition by just looking and saying how many patches are installed. It's more, are they protecting their vulnerabilities? They're addressing them, which is quite different than really understanding the risk, in my opinion. It's a risk. It's not all of the risk. I mean, so is it based a lot on that, or is it based on other factors? The way you said it, it seems like it's other factors.
But the patching, of course, they'd have to have a program, and they'd have to be, fairly current, if not up to date with it. During our process of each site visit, we would run a vulnerability scanner. We chose Nextwise by Rapid7 to do the scanning, and that would point out and also help show, where systems are vulnerable.
Do you do anything like that, Keith? Do you have anything similar to that? You measure the, the status and
yeah, we do. If I told you, I had to kill you. But no, we do have. Measurement, and what you said, I completely agree with, is the fact that it is that particular issue is just one risk in a multitude that we actually we measure and evaluate. Rob, if anybody's interested, is sitting right there, or even Jeffrey, can give you a list of what we actually what's involved in our risk assessments and what do we measure ourselves based on.
Stuart, do you want to comment on that?
I'm curious about my panelists here, my colleagues. I guess
it's hard to hear you. Is that on or is it off now?
It should be on.
Oh, okay.
Not too loud. I guess one of the challenges that's different than, say, conventional, or I often use the analogy compared to, say, hurricanes and earthquakes, we have a historical track record of that. Likewise, we have a historical track record of industrial accidents. The problem we have in the cyber world now, it is rapidly evolving. It may be a steady state we may reach in 5 or 10 years, but almost every time it's the first of its kind. And so I don't know what's going on, but the Ukraine went dark, I guess, a few months ago. How do we deal with things that are, with black swans, I guess is the other expression people use. How do you deal with things that have not been seen before?
He's asking you, the panelists, I believe.
We having a hard enough time trying to handle the things that we can see, to be honest with you. I mean, it's again, I think, without sounding doomsday, I mean, I think we're behind on what we're doing. I mean, we're trying to catch up right now. We're trying to protect ourselves as best we can using approaches that have been, somewhat proven and keep our ears to the ground. I mean, for lack of a better term, we're trying to listen to see what is actually what we're hearing. We stay involved. I I think you mentioned ICS cert. I mean, that's one of the things that we do. We try to stay involved with activities and groups that can give us information as quickly as possible and what to do about it.
That interesting point you mentioned about keeping your ears to the ground. I don't know if we do this or not, but we have people who actually attract the dark net, if you will. And it's fascinating. Apparently, there was a polling that goes on as to who are the most hated companies in the world. And as your rating goes up, the frequency of attacks you get go up. And so some companies have actually hired people to lower their ratings as one way how to reduce attacks.
Do you know where we are on that list right now?
I don't know.
You interested too, Eric? We'd like to find out. Any way we can drop ourselves.
All right, here's another question.
This is somewhat related to Stuart, but all of you could comment. So Stuart, I saw on one of your slides that you're looking at, back on that question on metrics, and that is some new research in that there. So scenario that I could see at my plant as well as others is that, okay, we're getting into this a bit more aggressively, we got to spend some money, okay, money, resources, and all that. So the upper beings there will say, okay, well, tell us where our risk is now, and if I give you a few $1,000,000, tell us how much you've lowered the risk. So how do I do that? How do I show risk? So we've looked at different heat maps by occurrence of risk versus the type, bigger risks and all that, but they're just so subjective in that there. Does anyone have any comment on how I could show risks in a way that, okay, there's a dollar being involved here to reduce it, but how do I quantify it?
Well, I'll give you a quick answer because I'll let my colleagues maybe elaborate much more. We've been surveying, we probably have now talked to maybe 20 or 30 organizations, asking them how they do it, because almost every organization today is being asked that in one way or another by their boss or their boss's boss on up the alley. The problem we have is most of the methods are based upon traditional probability type analysis. In fact, I think I saw a television show recently talking about stock market analysis, same idea. And the trouble is, of course, is dealing with low probability, high impact events. Humans do a terrible job of that. And a lot of times the cyber events are exactly those kinds of things. So we do not have an answer. We have pulled together and we kind of rank order what are current best practices, but current best practice basically is around a C-, our view. So it's good to know that's better than an F, but we haven't found anything that we think really gets into the B, let alone A category. But I'd be interested to hear what others have doing in their organization, what they have seen as best ways to assess your overall risk.
I'll give a slightly different perspective. You always get in this conversation when you talk about risk in terms of how likely is it. So exactly what was said at the end. So what we find our customers who are successful getting these projects off the ground, what they do is they actually also bring into the equation the pragmatic aspects. So if you can do certain things from a cybersecurity perspective that are also good engineering practices, such as having more efficient engineers and those kinds of things too, you marry those up and you can now start to get closer to a justification. So you get into argument around risk, well fine, you can table that, but if you can at least also tell a good story around how your engineers can be more effective at their jobs, then that sometimes puts this thing over the hump. At least we've found so far with our customers.
And just a follow-up to that, this very much is in the spirit of my colleagues who work in lean manufacturing. Once upon a time, the theory was you could either have higher quality or lower cost, but then if you do things better, you can both make your quality better and lower your cost. And one of the things we are looking at is ways in which things that are made both better for your organization as well as more cyber secure. So that is a good practice. It doesn't answer the question he asked at the beginning, but it is a very effective way.
No, but you know, one example of that in the industrial world, Stuart, is a lot of people are, oh, I'm sorry.
In the industrial world, I haven't yet come across one, maybe because I haven't looked that hard, but we've worked in many other industries, and one of my colleagues pointed out very well, in many ways, the advent of ATMs for banking cut down tremendously on issues of embezzlement, which was a cyber event or a crime of some kind, at the same time improve convenience for the customer. So there are examples of things, but we don't have a long list of them yet, and I'm sure I'm welcome. I would love to hear more examples like that, particularly from the ICS world, of things that both make it more secure and more effective and more cost effective.
No, just one example I was going to give you, I wasn't asking, I was going to say something, was one thing that a lot of our clients tell me is when you put in certain cybersecurity things, it stops accidental changes and mistakes. And just that alone often probably could pay for it. I don't know anybody that's kept track of the statistics, but just because you can't do things that you were previously able to do, and the person's intentionally trying to do it, but he's just doing it wrong, so you're stopping it. So that's one example.
Okay, question for the panel, generally, and I asked this one in a cyber session I was in yesterday, but I'm going to ask it again of the gentleman from BASF, and generally the gentleman from DuPont also. Have you gone, because I know you're a large company, you've got more than one control system in those plants, you may have more than one safety vendor in those plants. Have you done an overall threat model on the architectures you have?
I would like to answer that question as yes, we have. We have done a very high-level threat model of our landscape, but we really have concentrated more on doing threat models and evaluating from a risk assessment standpoint on individual site basis. I'd like to say that we've been able to do that. We do have some measures that are put in place from a more regional aspect, not necessarily global, but to really look at it from a threat model across the landscape of BASF Global, nothing except at a very high level of, lack of a better term, a what if.
Mr. Feldmeyer, what you think?
We don't have the resources to do that kind of level of threat vector for every particular pathway, and that's unfortunate. So what you rely on is your best practices and your cyber elements, cybersecurity elements that you already have in place through IT. For example, all the process control segments are layered behind at least 2 layers of firewalls in the architecture. So and we control those firewalls. Active Directory is not running, for example, so not all the firewall parts are open. So we control access through those firewall parts, and they do deep packet inspection and so forth.
Are you using ACLs and stuff, and not letting one protocol traverse both firewalls and things like that?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So and we don't allow any communication from the process control to the internet, and no email. So we're doing prescriptive measures. Like I said, employing best practices, but we have not done the full-blown threat model that you're talking about, Joe.
The other comment, just generally, snug up with some hackers, pay them to come attack your systems once or twice, and take copious notes, and don't plan to sleep, because most of them don't.
As Eric alluded to, we hired one too, and he doesn't claim to be one, but he's very good. And unfortunately, to be honest with you, the largest setback on that, as far as my internal hacker, is that they won't let me make him do the things I want him to do. So I fight against my own team. You would think I'm the boss, and I tell them, hey, look, do this for me, and they're like, no. That's not going to happen. But I would like to do that. It would give us good information to take that person who's internal to us in a company and have him do something. And we've done some penetration testing with him on several occasions. But for me, it's not to the level that I'd like to do it, because we learn a lot by doing it. But to them, of course, I've told them we have to treat this in a safe manner. So you got to watch how much you do. And what I want to do sometime might be just slightly off the wall. So they shut me down.
And the other thing regarding penetration tests, those are an excellent example, because looking at the human element is so important. I think it was mentioned in one of the sessions yesterday. I talked to one company, and they had a penetration test done, and somewhere usually they find between 15 and 20% of people fall for it, which is not 100%, but in an organization of 50 or 60,000 people, that's a lot. But what was fascinating is in some of their emails they sent, there was a header that said, note, this is an attack. Clicking on the link below will cause harm. And at least one top executive clicked on the link and then was asked afterward why. He said, I was curious to see what it would do. Now imagine someone going into your plant, and there's a big red valve that says, do not turn this valve or plant will explode. And someone says, oh, I wanted to see what would happen. There is an important issue regarding the education and mindset that is an important challenge, but I think is an important direction we have to focus on.
That's probably a good lead for this question.
Oh.
So we were all sitting here talking about we're all talking about the differences in technology between IT and OT, yet all of our cybersecurity programs, the accountability is with the office of the CISO, who clearly is always an IT guy and probably doesn't understand the automation side of the house. Should we not be changing that to be an independent body, that's somebody that's not directly in line with the IT?
We had a panel session with a variety of people, CSOs and CIOs and such at MIT last May, and one of the debate topics was, where should cybersecurity be in the organization? And it was interesting, it goes across the board. In some cases, it actually reports directly to the CEO. I know one organization that flipped it around, the CSO is above the CIO, and in many cases it's below the CIO or below CFO and so on. So it is a moving target. But I think as more and more organizations realize the fundamental importance of it, I think it's getting to have more power and more scope. One of the challenges many executives have is I have all the responsibility and none of the authority. And that's beginning to change, but changing very slowly.
If you find out the answer to that question, let me know, because my group is in the legal department at DuPont.
So there was a question about side benefits from implementing cybersecurity practices. We do cybersecurity certifications called ISA Secure to the 62443 standards. Part of that is security development lifecycle assessment and a pass-fail grade on that. And what we found is that the suppliers, we're certifying the products in the supply chain. So it's just a product certification, and the suppliers are telling us that they get better results from their product development processes because they rigorously went through each of their product development steps looking for cybersecurity requirements and practices. But as part of that, because they inspected it, they found ways along the way to improve it, remove steps, streamline, and get more just straight productivity out of their product development life cycle.
Yeah, I agree. What I used to say when I did consulting, as I go into an organization, I'd start by saying, your organization is dysfunctional. Not having been there for a day, even for a minute, the only question is, in what way are you dysfunctional? And the reason I say that is most organizations do not really understand how they operate. And to the extent to which doing your cybersecurity analysis helps you to better understand how you operate, most likely will help you to find better ways to operate. So it's a bit more amorphous. It's not quite as clear-cut a benefit, but a lot of times shining light into the dark corners of your organization can be very valuable.
For folks that are, not as far along the learning curve, could Eric and Keith maybe just give folks a quick to-do list or laundry list of, what they should do to improve their cybersecurity based on what you've learned?
Thank you. He's allowed me to go first. The first thing you have to do is, get an inventory of all your assets and then perform your risk assessment on those assets. So, and the risk assessment, can be general, and this is where we baselined our systems before we provided any security measures. And you're looking for things like, can somebody get in and blow the plant up, for example? Or can they create a release? Is it a safety or a health and environmental issue? And then you have to ask yourself, well, if it's neither of those, if I'm in a low risk manufacturing process, then what impact do I have on, the bottom line? What's the business impact? So, so having that inventory and assessment is key. Then you have to go figure out, okay, so, am I going to be driven into, segregating, my networks? I didn't draw it out on the map, but, we employ the 3-tier architecture, just like Keith showed on his slide for BASF. We apply a similar architecture within DuPont to separate the process control system. Then you start implementing your other security measures. You're making sure that you have antivirus, making sure you have patch management, making sure you have good user control. It took me, I was in direct support manufacturer process control of an industry, in DuPont this is going to be a example of what not to do. and I supported that process for 4 years before I took over this assignment. Well, 2 years into this assignment, I went back in. I still had access to that, not only that data, I still had access to the control system. Now, granted, I was still located physically at the site, but I was no longer in that job function. They should have terminated my access immediately. So, we've worked to improve that. But that's why you want to, make sure that you have, segregation of duty and making sure that everybody, least privilege principles are in employment there.
Yeah, and only thing I would add to what Eric is saying, because I agree with every step he kind of made there, is at the very beginning, make sure that you sit down. I mean, no doubt for any company, it's going to be a combined effort between IT and engineering, and you sit down and you set the landscape for what your philosophy is on that protection, on that automation security. So you have that baseline when you go out to do these risk assessments. You have a baseline that you're putting in front of manufacturing, saying, this is where we are on your given site. This is where we at least need to be tomorrow. And it kind of gives, once you have that footprint, you walk in, you have a basis now to sit with manufacturing and say, those $0 you're giving us to correct this problem needs to be at least $5 for me to get it done. Because David will agree that he will sell you something for $5 and it'll help you out. Right, David? $5? David?
For you, it's 10.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll underscore that too, because we work with a lot of companies in oil and gas and petrochemical, and you can't secure what you can't see. So I'll go back to this inventory thing that Eric talked about. A lot of our conversations have been around the IT side, some on the OT side, but you have to have also an evergreen approach to inventory as well, because change is frequent in a plant. You can't go out there and get all your assets counted once and expect that to be what you're going to carry forward. So there has to be some level of automation in there and the ability to understand at the deepest level what these assets are in terms of how they're configured, because it's the external threat and it's the internal threat, and you can only get to both those if you have all your inventory in one place and it's automated. Otherwise, you're going to keep going back around and around this, and you'll never get to a good state of cyber.
I have just one thought here. I agree with what they're saying, but when I'm visiting our customers, all of you, I've gone through a lot of safety training. I have yet been told not to use a USB stick or not to access a computer without written authorization. Oh, there comes some sound as well. I'm just wondering why, to all of you, that seems to be one step, maybe not the very first one, but it seems quite simple as well.
Sorry, I gotta add one quick thing to this. Have a mandatory automation security policy. Make your vendors comply with it, and any use case that you have for new projects needs to have a section in it that addresses how your vendors fall in line with your mandatory automation security controls.
To your point.
Repeat what you said.
To your point, yeah, I completely agree with you. I think one of the things that we don't do right now, because like you said, you come to BASF, we're going to show you a 15-minute safety film. It's going to tell you everything you cannot do, who's responsible for you. Doesn't tell you anything about that. And one of the things we know it in our heads right now. We buy a new system, it comes in, we're disabling USB ports, okay? But where besides that one policy do I have that right now, Rob? Besides 860M, where do I have that? Nowhere.
We covered it OAS training, but beyond that.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I'm taking that to heart right now, so, yeah.
Just a question around risk. You guys talked about doing quality risk assessments, and one of the other questions came around how do you define your risk, and have you looked at external threats versus internal threats, and where do you see the risk being? Is it higher from an external point of view, or do you find internal threats are somewhere on the top of the list?
For us, I would say right now it's more a tendency on the automation side to be internal risk is basically what we face more than anything else right now. I'm sure on the cyber side, get to our IT, we're all on that chart I showed you up above at level 4. It's a mixture. But at the automation side right now, we tend to have more internal risk than anything else that exists.
Okay, well, would you join me in, oh, Michael, I'm sorry. We have another one in 15 minutes. But go ahead, ask a question.
Just 2 quick things. One, as soon as the hacker gets in your firewall, it's an internal threat. So think about it that way. The other thing is the metrics and the risk measurement and the ROI calculations join MIT ICCube, join the research consortium, participate in the research, because ICCube is going to solve that problem, and you'll be the first ones with the results if you join the consortium. Okay?
All right. All right, well, will you help me, join me in thanking the panel? Very good.